This video is now in session, and Republicans as well as Democrats will go against each other in the 2022 Senate election, and there will be a total of 34 seats at stake, including 2 seats that were up for election in 2020. So with these seats and with a evenly divided Senate, the stakes are very high for both parties to take control of the U.S. Senate for the 118th Congress. Currently, there are 11 somewhat to very competitive Senate seats, and in this video, we're going to explore the best that Democrats and Republicans can do. Because while we did do this video before, a lot has changed since we've last made that video a couple of months ago. So let's start with Republicans. What is the best that Republicans can do in their Senate election? Now, this is contingent on the fact that Joe Biden gets nothing done between now and 2022, which actually isn't as ridiculous to think as before, primarily because there's not really much being done in the Senate right now, and there's a lot of stalemating going on between Republicans and Democrats, particularly on infrastructure and as well as on welfare benefits for families and for children. So if that situation occurs, that wouldn't actually produce the worst effect for Biden. It just wouldn't produce a good effect. Another thing that could be worse, though, is if Biden either screws up the virus with the virus going back to be in a very high level, and or possibly a variant destroying the vaccine progress that has been made by the Trump and Biden administrations throughout the past several years. Or it could also involve Biden doing something deeply unpopular, like what Obama did in 2010, where Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, which was at that time an incredibly hated bill by both Republicans and a lot of Democrats. Now, that's unlikely to happen this time around because because that time Democrats had 59 to 60 Senate seats going for them, which meant that they had a filibuster-proof majority. In this situation, they have exactly 50 seats, which means that they can't really do those kinds of unpopular bills that Obama was able to do when he was president. So it's unlikely to see any bad bills occurring. But again, the COVID cases might be Biden's Achilles heel if it goes back to being the main part of American politics. It unlikely will be. I mean, it could happen, but due to the vaccine program, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. But nonetheless, this is the worst that this is the worst that Democrats can do. So starting off with Democratic likely states. There's only one. Actually, no, there are none. For the Republicans, Missouri would be safe, and then for the likely states, Ohio would actually stay as safe. And for likely states, Florida would be likely, and that's it. And then for the lean Democratic states, it's likely that Colorado will be a lean Democratic state, and then as of now, I'd say Georgia. And then for the Republican side, we have for the lean states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that's Tilt, and as well as North Carolina, in addition to New Hampshire. And then finally, we have the Tilt states, which are Arizona for the Democrats. And then, actually, no, not for both of them would go for Republicans. So this is what the map would look like for the best scenario that Republicans could have, and this is compared to 2016, where Republicans had 52 seats, and yeah, it's not really much of a gain from the 115th Congress, I believe this is, or it could be 113th. And, nonetheless, it's still marginally better than this result. And this is exactly the same map as the as the one we're currently looking at, except different senators. So for Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto would be put out of power, so as Mark Kelly. Arizona, that seat would go back to being Republican, and then Georgia would flip for being Democrats. And most of these results are expected. Republicans, the National Republican Senate Committee, I believe, published its list of target seats, and they mainly targeted states like Arizona, Georgia, as well as North New Hampshire, Nevada, and as well as Colorado. Now, Colorado is unlikely to go Republican in 2022. In fact, it's getting increasingly impossible for Republicans to win in Colorado because Denver has been growing and because there are more people moving over to Colorado from Democratic states. It seems unlikely that Colorado will actually move back to being Republicans. Yeah, Republicans will still target the state in 2022 because they recognize that this seat, or not this seat specifically, but the other Senate seat was held by a Republican until the 2020 election when John Hickenlooper, a Democrat, beat Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent, by a pretty large margin. So Republicans think that they can, actually, they might not think that they can win the seat, but they're still going to go for that seat. But it's unlikely, even in the best scenario, that Colorado would go for Republicans. Now, Georgia is a more surprising addition to this list for Democrats. It would be surprising that such a competitive state would stay Democratic in this election, where it's favoring Republicans by a lot. But the thing is, Republicans don't really have any good candidates in Georgia. They don't have any good candidates besides Brian Kemp for governor, and for the Senate race, there doesn't seem to be any. There are a few candidates here, but none of them are really notable. The only notable one is Herschel Walker, a former football player, and he's only notable because Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham both endorsed him, even though he has not actually declared to run. But even if Herschel Walker does win the primary, even if he does win the Republican primary, it's unlikely that he'll be able to beat Raphael Warnock, because Raphael Warnock was able to win by lean margins, by around 2 to 3%. So if he wants to be able to beat Raphael Warnock, he has to portray Raphael Warnock as something, and Warnock was portrayed as a socialist, as a radical in the 2020 election, yet that didn't work. Now, some part could be attributed to Kelly Loeffler, being not being an actual incumbent, being a fake incumbent. But it seems in the best of scenarios that the Republican Party in Georgia is getting screwed by the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party in Georgia is currently screwing itself over the ballots, through the audits, and through the destruction of Brian Kemp and the Republican primaries. And it seems like that even in the best scenarios, Republicans won't be able to get Georgia. Now, they will be able to get Arizona in the best scenario, because it doesn't seem like that for Arizona. It doesn't seem like the potential candidates are like the declined candidates, or like any of the right-wing candidates are actually running. Paul Gosar originally was expressed an interest in running for this seat, and then he declined. And then Kimberly Yee, same thing. Originally ran for, originally expressed interest for this race, and then instead running for governor. Same thing for Daniel McCarthy, but he's not really as well known. Doug Ducey also declined. Now, with the current list that we have, Mark Bonovich seems like the best chance that Republicans have in order to win this seat against Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly is a formidable candidate in Arizona because he is a moderate, and because he has shown that he wants to get bipartisan stuff done, which is pretty well liked by Arizonan voters. If you look at previous elections, you see Jeff Flake, a moderate who was willing to negotiate with the other side. So is John McCain. Kirsten Sinema, technically you could say so as well, even though a lot of Arizonans are starting to not like her because of how conservative she is, even though she's a Democrat. But the only way that Mark Kelly will be able to get this election without any competitiveness is if Andy Biggs chooses to run, if Andy Biggs actually wins the Republican primary. But with Mark Bonovich running, and he is currently the Attorney General of Arizona, it seems unlikely that Andy Biggs will be able to win as a Tea Party candidate running for the Senate. So this is the best scenario that Republicans can do. Meanwhile, New Hampshire. The reason why we put New Hampshire as as lean Republican is because this scenario would happen if Chris Sununu would be running in the New Hampshire Senate race. Now, currently, he has not said whether he would run or not. It's a potential, and I think he also publicly expressed interest, but it doesn't seem like it's declared just yet. Now, for the Democrats, if by the way, if he does declare, it's going to be very hard for Maggie Hassan, currently the incumbent, in order to actually win the seat. Now, for the Democrats, what is the best that they can do? Let's unhighlight all of these races. And for the Democrats, they actually have more opportunities, not because the Democrats are better than Republicans, but rather because the Democrats don't have to defend as many competitive seats. They only have to defend 4: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and New Hampshire. Colorado isn't really competitive. Meanwhile, Republicans, they have to defend Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and potentially even Missouri if Eric Greitens does win out in the Republican primary. Now, that's 5 seats compared to 4. Oh, and also Ohio with Ron Johnson's Wisconsin, but Rob Portman, who is not running for re-election. So that's more seats that Democrats don't have to defend compared to the Republicans. Now, starting off with the safe states for Democrats, Colorado would be a safe state, and that's practically it. For the Republicans, they don't have any safe states in this scenario. For the likely states would include nothing. For the Democrats, the likely states would include Nevada, New Hampshire, Arizona, and those are as well as Pennsylvania. And then for the lean states for Republicans, it would be Iowa as well as Missouri, and those are all the states. Meanwhile, for them Democrats, the lean states would be Georgia as well as Wisconsin, and then Ohio. And then finally, for the tilt states, it would be North Carolina and Florida. So you can see here that Democrats have a net gain of 5 seats from this map, where they're able to flip almost every single competitive seat with the exception of Missouri and Iowa. Now, going through this map, Nevada, New Hampshire, these are all contingent on the fact that good candidates do not run. For New Hampshire, this is contingent on the fact that Chris Sununu does not actually run for the U.S. Senate. If Chris Sununu does not run, it's very likely that Maggie Hassan would be able to win this election. The only other challenger would be Kelly Ayotte, and she lost to Maggie Hassan in the 2016 election by tilt margins. This was one of the only seats that Democrats were able to flip in the 2016 election, besides Illinois, and Illinois was expected to go for Democrats no matter what. So if Chris Sununu does not run, then it's smooth sailing for Maggie Hassan. For Christine Cortez Masto in the Nevada seat, for Republicans, they haven't really been able to win in this election, in these kinds of statewide elections, but Adam Laxalt seems like the most likely option for Republicans at this current moment. He's been endorsed by Ted Cruz and as well as Rick Scott. He was the former Nevada Attorney General, and he was the nominee for the governorship in 2018, where he lost by 4%. Steve Sisolak did not even win by a majority of the voters in a Democratic wave year. But the first thing is Adam Laxalt. At this point, it doesn't seem likely that he will win the Nevada election, just because Nevada is kind of like North Carolina in that it's pretty inelastic. Now, North Carolina is different in that it is starting to trend back towards Democrats after North Carolina flipped from Democratic to Republican in 2012. But for Nevada, it doesn't seem like that's happening anytime soon. It doesn't seem like there is a shift happening from Democratic to Republican. So in the best scenario for Democrats, Christina Cortez Masto would definitely win it out. Mark Kelly, same thing, especially if Andy Biggs runs for this seat and wins the Republican primary. The seat will definitely be likely. But even if he doesn't, in the best scenario, if Biden is able to get the infrastructure deal passed, if he's able to get the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan passed, and as well as other initiatives related to climate change and health help in Arizona with the environment, then it will make Mark Kelly much more popular among Arizonans. For Florida and actually, let's not go there just yet. Georgia, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So Georgia still stays the same. Georgia is unlikely to go likely for Democrats because Raphael Warnock would have to start flipping Republican voters, and that would be unlikely as of now. And then for Ohio, this is Tim Ryan running as a Democrat for this race, and this would happen if he ran the Ohio race in the same way that Sherrod Brown ran his race back in 2018 when he won Ohio by a likely margin in a statewide race as a Democrat. That same kind of formula, if applied correctly into this race, will allow Tim Ryan to actually win the election. And so far, he's received a bunch of endorsements: Hillary Clinton, Ted Strickland, and as well as U.S. representatives, mayors, individuals, state representatives, just a lot of people in general. And it seems like he's most likely going to go against Jane Timken, who was the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party, and this would be the best scenario that Democrats would have. Ron Johnson's seat in Wisconsin could easily go for Democrats if they campaign hardly in it, and if they campaign with a good candidate. And if they have a good candidate, Democrats could actually build on their margins from the 2020 election race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump by doing more in Wisconsin and going from tilt to lean, and that's contingent on the fact that they get more votes from Milwaukee and Madison, and then they start to flip Kenosha County and as well as a few other counties. And then for Pennsylvania, this currently it's John Fetterman's seat to lose. John Fetterman is the Democratic frontrunner for the Pennsylvania Senate race, and he's likely to win the Democratic primary. And if so, he will go against one of these Republican candidates. And as of now, none of these candidates are really that good, with the exception of Sean Parnell. But besides that, there doesn't really seem to be any kind of good candidate that is running. And even if Sean Parnell does win, John Fetterman is way more popular and way more well known in Pennsylvania for good reasons compared to Sean Parnell. So that's the Pennsylvania Senate race. And then we have North Carolina and Florida. North Carolina, Democrats have been able to make a few gains in North Carolina. In the best scenario, they would be able to flip it by a tilt margin, and that's because their gains don't seem to be that big every single election. But the fact that they are making gains in every single election makes it better and better for them in future elections. For this race, if Pat McCrory does win this election, then the Republican primary, then whoever the Democratic nominee is, in the best of times for the Democrats, it would be a smooth sailing. But it seems likely at this point that Pat McCrory, where's the other person? There is another person that Trump... Yeah, Ted Budd. If Ted Budd does end up on top, then it's also somewhat smooth sailing because he is a Freedom Caucus member, and the Freedom Caucus, for context, is a very conservative group. The same group that Jim Jordan is part of, and I'm not sure if he does lead the Freedom Caucus or not, but Jim Jordan is the vice chair, and Andy Biggs, who we mentioned earlier, is the chair. And then finally, we have Florida. This is Marco Rubio's seat, and Marco Rubio has actually been pretty lucky when it comes to the Senate race. In 2010, when he first won this seat, Charlie Crist kind of ruined the race for everyone else, because had Charlie Crist just endorsed Kendrick Meek, or if Kendrick Meek endorsed Charlie Crist, then that would allow the Democratic Party to actually win the election, compared to Marco Rubio, who did not get a majority of the vote. In 2016, Marco Rubio was lucky because Donald Trump was able to win in Florida by lean margins. But in 2022, if the best scenario happens for Democrats, it seems very possible that the Democrats can actually win in this race, especially since Val Demings, a very well-respected person, is running in the Democratic primary, and She, I believe, was the mayor of, not the mayor, the chief of the Orlando Police Department. So it makes her look more like a moderate, and it makes her look more like someone who would not defund the police or do those supposedly socialist policies that Trump talked about in Florida during the 2020 election. And that's important, especially to Florida, where there are a lot of Floridians who do not like the word socialism or who do not want anything to do with socialism. So with Val Demings being a former police chief, it makes her unlikely to be portrayed as a socialist, and even if Marco Rubio does try to do so, she could very well use her credentials to counteract her, and in the best of scenarios for the Democrats, Val Demings would be able to beat Marco Rubio, the incumbent senator of Florida, to then give Democrats a total of 55 seats. So that's the two scenarios that could happen: Republicans either having 53 seats or Democrats having 55 seats. It's not really ever going to go back to the 59 seat majority that we see Democrats having in 2008, or Republicans having a very large majority in the first 2 years of Reagan's administration. But it is nonetheless, there are net gains to be made for both Republicans and Democrats. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.